cool? Is my hair good?
What the fake? I don't believe that. I don't believe it's real for a second. In fact, I'm sure it's not. There's never been an original. And further, there's no photograph. And I've only ever seen a photocopy of it. I don't believe it happened. And certainly the way as described would have been impossible. I don't have any memory of going to tramp. Certainly not in the outfit that I would have worn. Her stories have changed so many times about what happens, when it happens, how it happens, with different versions. And each time she speaks, there's a different version.
Let's have another look at what Ghislaine says here. She is distancing herself from evidence that she was present in this photo. By saying I don't believe it rather than it didn't happen, it's distancing and then casting doubt on the authenticity of the photo, that there has been no original, that she's only ever seen a copy of it. I don't believe it happened. Not that it didn't happen, but she doesn't believe it. This is classic distancing. I don't have any memory of going to tramp. Exact same thing happening again. There's no memory of it. That way you can say I don't remember as opposed to it didn't happen. Now we see a new adaptation. You see the hands coming in. This is a shifting of the blame. Her baseline behaviour of looking up and to the left has stopped at this point, and the hands are now rubbing against each other. This is classic lying to me and deception. Today I'm talking about Ghislaine Maxwell, and I'm going to make the assumption that you already know who she is and what she has done. So I won't be talking about her history too much. Rather, I'm focusing on the question, is she a victim or is she a villain? And the answer is pretty simple, depending upon who you ask. If you ask Ghislaine, she is clearly a victim. Now let's be generous for a moment and try and look at things through a different lens. Perhaps Ghislaine's own skewed version of reality, and see if we can find any reason at all to consider her a victim. Here is a woman who was born into obscene wealth and opulence and knew nothing other than this indulgent lifestyle. Well, until things went bad for her father, Papa Maxwell, and he fell to his death from a yacht, the Lady Ghislaine of all names. Not long after, it was revealed that Papa Maxwell had some huge discrepancies in his company's finances, and he was taking money from his company's pension funds to bolster his shares of the Mirror Group. This was a strategy he used to try and save his other companies from bankruptcy. Well, when you're talking hundreds and millions of dollars of fraudulent activity, you have to wonder if he really did have a heart attack and fell to his death, or was he murdered? Well, Ghislaine thought he was murdered, and he wouldn't have been the first person to have been killed for money. And this is money only you and I could possibly dream of in our entire lives. So murder is certainly possible, but so too is the possibility that he simply killed himself.
So you concluded the murder was very unlikely.
So how does this make Ghislaine a victim? Well, again, it depends upon who you ask. Her defense team used Ghislaine's childhood and father to paint her as a victim when they argued she had a difficult and traumatic upbringing with an overbearing, narcissistic and demanding father. They suggested this made her very vulnerable to Epstein, whom she met right after her father's death. So is that true? Well, possibly. She was used to getting everything she ever wanted in life, and she was handed every opportunity on a golden plate, and she was worshipped and adored for her status over whoever she really was. And if her father was this psychologically abusive, narcissistic, dominating figure, as I genuinely suspect he was, then this, of course, would have impacted the development of her personality and increase her vulnerability. And perhaps Epstein was a bit of a fatherly substitute for her after her own father passed away. She would have been moulded by her own father in many ways, and when the Maxwell estate and fortune was under scrutiny and the cash supply dwindled, Epstein was a substitute in that regard also. Her lawyers also argued that Ghislaine had no criminal or adverse history before Epstein and had none after either. And with a very fragmented and superficial sense of self, this picture makes sense to me. But it doesn't extend to the perverse behaviour of recruiting young girls for the sexual gratification of a man she presumably loved at some level. And maybe Ghislaine was abused in that way as a child also. I mean, I don't know. Even if that were the case, that would explain but not excuse what she did. And what she did was pretty horrible. She not only used her position of power, she used her position as a woman, an older female figure, to gain the trust and security of young, impressionable, and often financially needy girls, to lure them into the lair of Epstein so they could be assaulted. And even if she waived wads of money and they came willingly, it is still an unconscionable thing to do, to exploit the vulnerability, the ignorance, and the desperation of another young female. For what? For the sexual gratification and perverse desires of Epstein? But was Ghislaine a victim also? Well, in some ways I guess she was. Whilst we can't imagine how being filthy rich could be a burden, it's called filthy rich for a reason. Research shows that money really can change the way we think and the way we behave. Whilst there are undeniable advantages to wealth, if that is all you know, then it's hard to know the value of many other things in life, such as the sense of accomplishment and fulfillment that hard work provides, the constant awareness rich people must endure of their image being scrutinized every time they leave the house. Wealthy people are also disproportionately impacted by addiction, and some studies show extreme wealth can cloud moral judgment and that it distorts empathy and compassion and can have a significant and negative impact on mental health. Add a narcissistic father and the loss of her own needs and identity into the mix, and I guess there is some validity to the argument of her victim status. But unfortunately, few of us, myself included, have very little sympathy. Whilst Ghislaine's early environment, her family tree and her genetics and the experiences that she had in her life all shaped this potential vulnerability, the choice that she made to engage in sex trafficking and other related offences was entirely her own. But here's where it takes a turn for me. Let's assume her troubled childhood, the grief of losing her father, her extreme wealth and fragmented sense of self all made her vulnerable. It does not excuse what she did. Vulnerability is not an excuse. And Ghislaine had an opportunity for moral redemption. She had a chance after Epstein was incriminated for these offences to come forward and to take ownership of her role in these events. But she fled. She hid. She played dumb. She denied any involvement at all. And when I look at Ghislaine's interview from prison and listen to her speak, she has no remorse whatsoever. She still thinks that she is a victim of equal weight to the girls she exploited and handed over to Epstein to molest. And she is also still blatantly lying about pretty much everything. She's lying about the things that happened, she's lying about her role in those events, and she continues to cover up the many other filthy rich people that participated in the parties on Epstein Island. And if she wanted any empathy from me, her opportunity to demonstrate some guilt, some shame, some remorse, some degree of accountability has long gone. Whilst Ghislaine will pretend to be sorry, my own investigation and analyses of her speech and her body language and her words have confirmed without any doubt that she is the villain that the majority of us have long suspected her to be. And she is still protecting other very influential and filthy rich figures from prison, like Prince Andrew. So what does Ghislaine say about that infamous photo that Epstein took of Prince Andrew and then 17-year-old Virginia Giuffre?
I don't believe it happened.
It didn't happen? Some may say that Virginia Giuffre wanted to mix with the rich and the famous back then and wanted to cash in on the events later on. And she did cash in. She settled out of court with Prince Andrew for what is an undisclosed, but I can only imagine, a massive amount of money. But does that mean that it didn't happen? Or does that mean that the payout was more valuable to Virginia than a long court trial, dragging her through the events, reliving the events of her youth, up against people with much more money and power than her? Would she have even won the court battle? Would she even have survived it? I don't know. I would probably take the life-changing money too. But this is not an indication of whether the events happened or not. We can't forget that it wasn't just Virginia. There were so many more young girls involved in this scandal, and we won't ever truly know that number. Accounts have suggested that it's anywhere between a few dozen to over 100. My point here is that this did happen. It unequivocally did happen, and Ghislaine knows it. Whilst Ghislaine and her few supporters might assert that the photo is a fake, they are yet to provide any valid account for their reasoning. I mean, I've heard it said that the red eye effect, the reflection of the camera flash in Prince Andrew and Virginia's eye, is visible, but not then with Ghislaine. But this is preposterous. I've watched a video from a photographer with decades of experience suggesting that Ghislaine is at a different position in the room and that the reflection of the flash in the window in the context of the angle of the photographer all suggests that the picture is real. Others trained in photo editing have looked at the photo and the details around where Virginia's arms are positioned in front of Ghislaine's body, the shadows, the contours, etc., and suggest that the photo has not been photoshopped at all. But most convincing for me is the account of the actual person who took a photo of the original photo in the first instance.
Hi, I'm Michael Thomas, the photographer who photographed the photograph of Prince Andrew and Virginia Roberts. I photographed it for the Mail on Sunday while on assignment in Australia, doing a story with Virginia Roberts in 2011. She pulled out the picture. We were both like, oh, that's quite an interesting photo. Gee, this is quite a big thing. I knew it was an important photo. So she handed me the photograph, and then I just put it on the table in the hotel room, and then I copied it, and I think I took over 30 frames, which is quite overkill for copying one photo, but I thought I didn't want to get it out of focus or get it wrong, because I knew how important it was. And then I turned the photo over, and I took, I think, 3 frames of the back of the photo. I was holding the original, photo in my hand, that it was developed at Walgreens, and then it had the date that it was developed on. So there was nothing. So yeah, no, at no point did I think it was fake. It was a normal photograph. It was a physical print. It exists.
So the photo is most certainly real, and Ghislaine was most certainly there that night, and both she and Prince Andrew continue to deny this.
Don't recollect that photograph ever being taken.
But Ghislaine is terrible at hiding the truth, and her body language and her speech and her language all scream deception to me. Earlier I mentioned that obscene wealth can obscure one's self-identity, and I don't think Ghislaine truly knows who she really is. Watch how this question about who is the real Ghislaine, the real G, watch how uncomfortable this makes her.
Everyone was always asking who is the real G, who's the real Ghislaine.
Well, I think the best people to answer that is probably the people who are closest to me, like you.
Saying like you is very interesting to me, and you'll notice she giggles straight after it and then touches her head. What she's trying to do is get her brother to confirm, to validate that he does know her well, which he doesn't do. He just sits silently. You'll also see at the same time this extension of what we call the supratrochlear vein. It's an indication of increased blood pressure and discomfort. I assume in that video, not only does Ghislaine not know who the real Ghislaine is, but neither does her brother who was asking the question. He simply gives her nothing when she reflects that question back onto him. Loss of identity is certainly something Ghislaine will now have plenty of time to think about. 20 years, in fact, to ponder who she is and perhaps what she has become. And before you figure out who you are, you have to figure out who you are not. And Ghislaine is a long way from accepting that she isn't a manipulative, deceitful, and selfish deviant. Perhaps that's not who she once was, and let's hope that's not who she will always be. But for her to be rehabilitated and for her to be seen as the victim that she protests to be, then she has to take accountability for the decisions that she has made and for the things that she has done. And that hasn't happened yet. And there is a saying, an expression that has just come to me as I'm making this video, and I can't recall who said it. I will look it up and I'll put it on the screen. But it says, when I let go of what I am, I become what I might be. So until that day arrives, Ghislaine cannot be a victim, even though she may be a victim in other ways. For the crime she's been charged with and the pain and the suffering that she has caused, she is definitely a villain. And Ghislaine, at least for now, is where she belongs.